Good morning. And
Good morning.
for those of you in New York, but good evening for those of us in Hong Kong. I am Alice Mung, Executive Director of Asia Society Hong Kong, and it is my pleasure tonight to be hosting this program called Phoenix Rising, a conversation with Nancy Yao Maasback, President of Museum of Chinese in America. And I am so delighted she is a morning person. I'm not. I'm a night owl. But so it worked out that she's got up really early this morning to join us, Nancy, to talk about MoCA. And for those of you know that I was the executive director there, 2009 to 2011. I had the pleasure of helping becoming the executive director at MoCA when we moved from the space that was unfortunately on 70 Mulberry that was a year ago witnessed the fire. But then when we moved to 215 Center Street in 2009 with the beautiful design by Maya Lin, I was fortunate to be the ED for 2 years. And so right now it's great pleasure to reconnect. It's always very close to my heart in that my family, we have a journey tile on the over at MoCA, and I have been a long admirer of all the wonderful work. Continue to be a wonderful supporter of MoCA because it's tells the story of a Chinese in America, over almost 200 years history of Chinese in America. And Nancy, as the president of Museum of Chinese America since 2015. Before that, Nancy is a colleague working. She was at Yale, China. And also, she had over 20 years of leadership experience in nonprofit as well as for-profit, and really delighted that I have this opportunity tonight to talk to Nancy about MoCA's transformation. And we're going to end on a high note, I know, when we talk about the future of MoCA. And for those of you who were watching, like some of us, Chinese New Year last year, the news of the fire, I was out of town, and I remember getting the text message. MoCA was on fire, and I was really, like all of us, very concerned. But it turned out it was 70 Mulberry Street, the 129-year-old building located in Chinatown, the heart of Chinatown, and where the 85,000 artifact of MoCA was archived. So it was not 215 Center Street, but where the archive was held. So I want to use this opportunity to talk about, ask Nancy about the fire and how, really like the Phoenix Rising, how MoCA has transformed itself this last year, despite the fact that it's probably been closed for most of 2020. But we have some good news, and I know we're going to hear more about it. So I'm going to turn it over. Nancy, welcome to Asia Society Hong Kong, and tell us more about what your year has been like at MoCA.
Yeah, no, thank you, Alice. And it's so nice to always catch up with you. Unfortunately, usually you're in New York doing your global tour, and I get to see you and we can catch up in the space. But good morning to all of MoCA's Hong Kong friends and to old friends. Really miss Hong Kong, and we've been thinking of Hong Kong through the last number of difficult years, and miss my mountains in Hong Kong. But to everyone who has been paying attention to the museum and its last year, thank you very much, because we felt the love, and we've really felt the sort of renewed sense and recognition of value within the journeys of Chinese, not just coming to America, but just the diaspora. I mean, the many journeys that the Chinese diaspora has taken over, centuries and thousands of years. We are travelers, and we have built homes in other places. And yet, I think the strong ancestral ties have always made this sense of Chineseness very important. And we felt it. We felt it at MoCA when the archives went up. But I will headline this, just generally, the big reflection that I've had, and maybe you can start from there, is, Alice, I mean, Mocha's been around 40 years. We celebrated 40 years last year, and we have had a lot of difficulties. There have been a lot of volatility, a lot of ups and downs, a lot of difficulty sustaining the organization. And, this is a rounding error for anyone in the audience, but the Mocha budget is only 2.8 million US dollars a year. Okay, that's a rounding error for most other nonprofits. And I guess I think about that not in terms of, how small we are, but, how much we do. And the staff is only 13 full-time people. And yet we have 4 million people on social media platforms. We welcome 50,000 physical visitors to the space every year. So it has a great reach and a great purpose, but because the budget was so small and because it was so difficult getting philanthropic support for so many years, it just wasn't consistent. I think we questioned the value of what we did at times. When it's difficult to sustain, you wonder if you're important. You wonder if the stories and the narratives have any value. And I think the largest silver lining out of the fire, which happened just about a year ago, January 23rd, 2020, was that the outpouring and the emotional support and the financial support that says, wait, this is important. And sometimes there were notes that came with financial support that said, kind of like, I forgot that this was important. I realize that there is value in these stories and these artifacts. And, let us continue to tell those stories. So the big silver lining is others recognize the value of Chinese American history, and we fully embrace our value. Because again, when people don't fund you, when foundations don't come forward, when you have trouble paying your rent, when you miss payroll, which are all realities of Mocha, and Alice, better than anyone else, how difficult it was, how ironically difficult it was to sustain such a small nonprofit that had such a big purpose and mission. So it's been really dramatic to see the silver linings in the last 370 days.
But I know for a fact that Mocha, what struck me was in 2009 when I became the executive director, was how much of Chinatown, how much heart this organization, it was, everybody loved it. And there's not one person who just did not love Mocha. And because of the history, the way it started, a lot of it was literally picking up, I think, Charlie and Jack finding these trash that was disposed of by, the Bachelor Society of Chinatown, ironed, that were discarded. And they literally was turned into treasure of the story of not just Chinese America, but, or Chinese Americans. But the reason it's called Chinese America, it's just the fascinating history. And as a new immigrant, I did not know. And what was the museum, what has been able to do is really telling the story of our Chinese journey in a way that, although it was small and the budget was small, but it was a jewel, definitely a jewel in New York. And I think the transformation now of becoming really kind of a national museum and something the board, I have to congratulate you and the board, and the recognition. So I remember seeing the fire, but the stories that came out of it, and also, just the like you said, the outpouring that the institution meant for so many people in New York and the nation, and also in light of Trump's America. I think it also serves as a reminder of the journey that immigrants, the contributions immigrants have made in the United States, not just Chinese in America, but all immigrants. So I think that the timing, although it was beginning of Chinese New Year, wasn't it? I mean, and how did you navigate from that to then my congratulations on the 4 foundations recognition. So tell us more about that transformation from January till when I saw the news of 4 foundation recognizing Mocha as a cultural icon of the U.S. So tell us more about that.
Absolutely. And, maybe it would be nice just to bring everyone up to speed. I have some images from the first 6 weeks of the fire, and I can show them while I tell a little bit of the story. And another one of the silver linings in the fire is, when the New York Times, when the South China Morning Post, when NPR starts reporting about the collections and also reiterating the value of these stories and these artifacts, things change. The power of headline news. We were in the New York Times, I think, once every 10 days for the first part of this year for months. But this is really just bringing us all up to speed on how the fire transformed. And I know Joanna Lee and Ken Smith are going to talk about the Chinese Almanac, I think in a few days at Asia Society. But we were with them at the museum on January 23rd, 2020. I was moderating conversation with them about the year of the metal rat. And they were saying that it's going to be a very difficult year, that you should find a place and hide. And just stay with loved ones and not move. And who knew what a harbinger that would be for the year. But, the audience, you don't want to be too superstitious. You're kind of like, ha, 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 when you're listening to bad news. But at the same time, we were mildly concerned. I was with them at dinner that night, January 23rd, the eve of Lunar New Year Eve. And I get a phone call from my colleague, Neil. Nancy, hurry. There's a fire at 70 Mulberry Street. And here's the fire. And just let's bring you a couple of years. So we had 85,000 items in this building. This was a very iconic building. It was built in 1892. And 5 social service organizations serving the Chinatown community were housed here. It's a city-owned building, but we had United East Association, Chinatown Manpower, where my mother learned English and typing skills, a senior center headed by the CPC, and also the very famous H.T. Chen Dance Center. So all of these 5 tenants and Mocha, we were on the 2nd floor, so you can see it right above the brick awning. And this is a space that has been around as an iconic building in Chinatown, but it also was a school. So PS 23 was an elementary school that really served many of the low-income early immigrants of the early part of the 20th century. And actually much of the archives from PS 23, which wasn't predominantly Chinese until 1930s and 40s and 50s, but was European immigrants, we actually had those in our archives as well. So this is a space before the fire. As you mentioned, Charlie Lai and Jack Chen, the co-founders of what was then called the New York Chinatown History Project, they all saw all these dumpsters in Chinatown. The generation was turning, and they picked things out of those dumpsters because they saw value in that history, and they saw value in that artifact. And if you take away anything from this conversation today, know your value and know the value of your own journey. So this is a space where over 85,000 items were properly assessed. So one thing that also came out of the fire when we were extracting things out of the building, we had so many volunteers, expert professional volunteers. And it gave me such pride and joy because you could tell how impressed they were with how properly, professionally assessed our collections were. I think there was some sort of assumption that it would be a big disarray of things that would be unsalvageable. But because of the director of our collections, an incredible woman named Yao Ma, and her deputy, Kevin Chu, things were all properly assessed. Acid-free boxes lined with tissue paper. As you can see, everything was properly organized. And, a lot to Alice, to you for when you moved over. This is when the process started. But all these incredible library of books that are out of print. We had the first full collection of the first Chinese American newspaper. To give you a sense of the expansiveness of that, UC Berkeley called us and said, you're the only ones that have it. Maybe take a look at it. NUS in Singapore uses our research all the time. And this is, some of the early signage of those who believed in the museum. This is the early builders. I think right before you started, they gave gifts to support the building. And this was a sign that unfortunately is still in that building. So 5-alarm fire, one of the densest neighborhoods in New York City, if not the world. And the fire started on the 4th floor of this iconic 5-story building. And again, we were on the 2nd floor. So once I got the phone call at dinner, I rushed over the 3 blocks, and this is around 8:45. And coincidentally, a lot of my colleagues were in Chinatown that night. It was a Thursday night, and we saw the roof of the building come down. And of course, we just sat there, mortified. This is our council member, Chin, other elected officials the day after the fire. So what we saw was the 4th floor roof come down. Then we saw the 3rd floor roof come down. And more importantly, we saw the hoses go in. So you can see a hose right there. We stayed until the hoses stopped that night at about 2 a.m. And we're like, okay, we knew that the artifacts would suffer much more from water damage because a fire looked like it had stopped. And you can still see the 2nd floor seems intact. So we said, okay, let's reconvene in the morning and see how things are. When I arrived in the morning, about 5 hours later, at a little before 8 a.m., 4 massive hoses were spraying into the building. And I was very concerned because those hoses were causing, potential water damage. And I heard that the hoses ended up going on for another 16 hours. So we had pretty much assumed that the artifacts were lost. And you can see the water damage just from this side window near the library space. And that's when the New York Times covered an article for the first time, likely 85,000 items destroyed. We quickly mobilized, and the outpouring of feed that came from all over the world to help save the archives was so incredible. And I will say it was this support that did create some pressure on New York City agencies to come out and get in there. So they stopped once the building was secure, which was about on January 29th, we got in there for the first time. So this is 6 days after. This building was secured, and we were able to retrieve about 5% of the items. And then the building wasn't secure. So we had to then wait. And that waiting was also treacherous to the salvation of the archives. So again, this outpouring of the media attention, all the local news, South China Morning Post, everyone covered it. And finally, about 9 days later, we were able to extract out. And this is such a mobilization from the Chinatown community, as you mentioned, who would not stop until the archives came out. And subsequently, we were able to retrieve 98% of the archives.
Great. That's wonderful.
And this was a space that was set up by support.
In New York City's Chinatown, an old building.
So we were extracting out these items. And you can see what people don't realize is also when you take things out. This is Ang Lee. You may have just seen that was Ang Lee's collection from when he, some of his film components. But how beautifully wrapped these were and preserved.
And now an update on a story.
So you can see the effort. This was a multi-agency New York City effort. The Golden Venture, some of the paper sculptures made by the Fujianese immigrants from 1993. Flower Drum Song, one of the most early. And these items were just incredible. And this is the irony of also, we're all dressed in PPE. And these were volunteers that came out to salvage things that were too fragile, that we had to walk back over to our building. But we're all dressed in PPE. And as you know, COVID had already hit China. And people were just like, oh no, there's COVID in Chinatown. This is still early. We didn't really get the wave until March. So we're all dressed in PPE, but we're carrying things. It really confused people. And we then, and then still a few days later, we still carried on our Lunar New Year. And just, we can end on this. This is one of the images from the Fujianese of the Statue of Liberty, but it has sort of an iconic, you can't quite tell, Buddhist face, but holding obviously the Statue of Liberty. So I think what we've been able to recognize from all this is the incredible tenacity of the community and just trying to really salvage it. And all of that silver lining coverage that we got, 98% recovered. However, it will take, since we're doing a proper conservation assessment, it will take approximately 6 years and approximately $5 million to properly conserve. So those are real numbers. And also we've rented out an incredible new space. So during this pandemic period, we were able to actually get a young architect to, I'll show you, to bring up, if you can see these images. Can you see these images?
Not yet.
Maybe. Okay, I haven't shared yet. So we've been able to bring on a young architect to help us design a new space, because also the one aspect that people don't realize is there's no space. We had to actually find space to house everything. So when things are ready to go, where do you put them? So we were able to find a new space just around the corner at 3 Howard Street, and it's been outfitted. And you can see some of so this image cupping was right in the middle of the pandemic in October. That's Herb Tammer, Chief Curator, UMA, Director of Collections, and Henry Tang, who may be familiar to some of you, who donated one of the 3 Chinese typewriters in survival. And you can see it on here. So this is totally outfitted. It has this incredible space for research and scholarship. You'll see some of the salvaged artifacts from the space, some of the signage that we've just put up there. And this is one of those Chinese typewriters, one of 3 that we know still exists. And these are the archives that have been starting to come back. And now we have all of the archives in our possession, and we've been working on just preserving them. So this will be an incredible space for collections and research. And it's also a place that will help us share about the new dream for the new MoCA.
Well, congratulations, 98%. That is incredible, because I remember getting the news text to me. I was with my colleagues, Northern California colleagues in Sundance, and we were celebrating Chinese New Year with Daniel Day Kim and other Asian American and Janet Yang. And when the text message started coming in, I think we were all really worried and didn't know what. I mean, I think everybody was expecting the worst, and so to have 98% salvage, that is really, really incredible. And it's so great to see Yue. Yue was there when I was there, and I before I left, I hired Herb. So it's wonderful to see the the staff. I know how dedicated they are. It's small team, but it's a really dynamic team, and hats off to you for the wonderful work. But tell us then, the city. I've been really been worried. I mean, right now we also know about Chinatown because of COVID. You had talked about, and Chinatown had one of the reason I know Chinatown was devastated after 9/11. And the new MoCA also came into being because of kind of 9/11, and kind of talk about MoCA's role. I think in this year of COVID, and how have you guys been managing not having opened? And it's great that there is a space now to house the archive retrieved, but also I understand you also have been doing stuff online, and right now people can come online to see the a kind of like a virtual. So tell us more about that.
I'm sorry. It's been such a difficult year for everyone, and MoCA has definitely suffered many, many hits. So we had the fire, of course, and again, a year of just managing that entire effort, and also managing opening a new space and outfitting it properly. But UMA, the archives were in 3 different places. So we had a portion of it at our museum that was getting managed and stabilized, because there are many phases of conservation. And then there were in 2 other places. So Western Pennsylvania getting freezer stabilized, and another place in Westchester. And many of us took trips out there just to assess what the damage was. And UMA was driving to Pennsylvania, multiple times, and to Westchester. And this is all in the COVID fear. And not only that, what we did see, and, I'm surprised that we were wondering if it was discrimination, because we didn't want to make assumptions, but school groups started canceling by January 2nd. So again, the wave really didn't hit us until March 15th. That's when things really started popping up in the US, specifically first in Seattle. So in January 2nd, we started getting school groups canceling. And of course, we had heard about what was going on in Wuhan, but we're like, wait a second, why would they cancel? And then they didn't say they were canceling for fear of COVID, because Chinatown must have COVID if China has COVID. And you could kind of feel that correlation. But again, we didn't want to assume it was racism. Obviously it was, right? And the odd thing about this, for those who know Chinatown, is Chinatown has fewer connections with mainland China, Hong Kong, and Taiwan than Flushing or Sunset Park, which are newer immigrant communities. Chinatown, we're looking at third and fourth generation families at this point. And maybe they're going back to, look at their ancestry or something more like on a research basis, but their connections with China are not as great as the newer immigrant communities. So the association that Wuhan virus and people are traveling to Chinatown was actually even so much less grounded, in my opinion. So we saw all of that happening. And so Chinatown has suffered a bit, and a much earlier. And also it's just the name of the area, Chinatown. So the racism was rampant. I'm so used to racism, just growing up in the US, Alice, I'm sure, there are more incidences of racism than you can probably quantify, but I'm so jaded by racism, right? I've received so much racism growing up as a minority in many communities. And so what I recognize myself, and I think what we wanted to recognize is the resilience of people who are constantly dealing with racism. And Chinatown felt it. So we started recording things that Chinese communities and networks were doing to help challenge and help COVID. So these incredible stories of PPE getting delivered from Shenzhen, from Singapore. So we said, let's be the positive light in all of this and show the mightiness of the guanxi, of the network of Chinese communities, and the incredible PPE that was coming in from everywhere because there was ample supply. So we were telling those stories, and we called it the COVID-19 Special Collection, which you now have view in our windows. But then other amazing Asian American advocacy groups were recording all the issues of racism. And then Black Lives Matter happened. And the MoCA, Museum of Chinese America, yes, we were telling the Chinese American narrative, but I think one thing that may get missed sometimes in the broader spectrum of the space we sit in is we're about the American narrative. We're about how the Chinese diaspora came and created an American narrative. The reason you didn't know the history when you started at MoCA, what I didn't know fully all the details, is because it's not in the history textbooks. Because the only legislation against a group of people entering this country is called the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, and yet no one knows the details of that Exclusion Act. So why we don't know it and why the American narrative is fully flawed and just needs to be fully redefined is because these stories aren't incorporated. So our job and our mission is to be a museum of that new redefined American narrative and contributing to it in that way. And I will always say over and over again, MoCA is not by Chinese people for Chinese people. MoCA is by all for all. And I hope anyone of any ancestry can enter the museum and have a greater sense of themselves when they leave. It's about your own journey and relating it with other people's stories. So it has been hit very hard, but we have seen so many silver linings, including Ford's designation of the museum as one of 20 of America's cultural treasures. And we're the only one that has anything to do with Chinese ancestry or Chinese narrative, and only one of 4 Asian American organizations in the country.
Well, that's great. And then with it, there was a grant with it, correct? It was a designation, but also a quite generous monetary grant, which is really a shot in the arm for MoCA.
It's I will say the foundations have stepped forward. And it is not easy for people to say, wait a second, things were done not well before. And there is inequity in funding. I think philanthropists and foundations have been challenged, right? It's not a fair process. It hasn't been. And I think the leadership that the Ford Foundation, Bloomberg Philanthropies, the Mellon Foundation, Wallace Foundation, so many groups who have said, time out. We should be partnering and we shouldn't make this jumping through loops and hoops and all this to sort of prove something. And what I recognize is in the grants, and I will say this just from my own perspective, I always wanted to be the good student on the grants. And Alice, you'll know what I mean by that. I wanted to dot the I's and cross the T's and show them that we were in great shape and that we could handle any adversity. And when I sat as a grant reviewer, because you have this opportunity in New York City sometimes to be sitting on grant reviews, I was reading other people's grants. And these grants were like, we can't do it anymore. We are in turmoil. You better give us this money or we're going to close. And I just had a big light bulb kind of moment. I was just like, why are we not being honest with foundations? We are struggling like no man's business. And we are carrying it all on our backs. And then we're trying to put a smile on our face. Again, trying to be that resilient self and that resilient perseverance Chinese self. I slapped myself in the face and I said, this is not honest. And foundations won't know, and people won't know unless I tell them, guess what? We couldn't pay rent for 6 months. I missed payroll twice. I didn't get paid for 6 months because of the burden of trying to develop and sustain an organization where people and the world might not fully understand the value of the museum. And I'm so, just that light bulb went off and I said, we've got to be honest. And when we started being honest, Foundation started seeing us for who we are and seeing the value. So the grant from the Ford Foundation, just to give you an example, Ford Foundation led, there was a consortium of other groups that came in, was $3.1 million. I told you what our annual budget was, $2.8 million. And unrestricted, and it was like winning the Powerball lotto. It came in one lump sum. And anyone who knows finances knows that my balance sheet just went from nothing to something. And that opens the door for financing. That opens the door for sustainability. That opens the door for improving our GuideStar rating, Charity Navigator. You tell me. So suddenly we have validity. But the big thing that, Alice, I want to make sure that we are held accountable for is, all boats can rise in this situation. I don't want to be like, okay, now MoCA's fine. Good luck to all you smaller organizations. We need to create the right infrastructure and systemic change so that we can see the value in others. And so we're thinking about ways to do that, providing an honorarium to some of the smaller Chinese historical museums all over the country, thinking about ways, if we've curated an exhibit, how that exhibit can travel to other organizations and have a longer shelf life. So there's a lot in this that isn't just like, yay, now we're okay. Good luck, everybody else. That is not the attitude.
Correct. Well, we have I want to encourage those in the audience send in their question via Slido. I'm getting them already. But one of the quotes, I love Nancy's quote about knowing your value and your journey. And this is something I tell my colleague here in Asia Society in Hong Kong. Know our values and don't underestimate ourselves. And you're so right, because I think all nonprofit, and especially I think Asian, Chinese American, right? We're a good student, the model minority. We don't want to be a burden on other people. But if our story is worth telling, it also any nonprofit. I think the lifeblood is monetary support, and that is so important. And I think you touch upon something that is I couldn't agree with you more, but it's also the passion. You are passionate about MoCA, and I, that is really inspirational. And but also, I think the passion of MoCA was something that I was so struck with from first day when I arrived. And I didn't grow up in Chinatown. I grew up in the Midwest, and I have to say, growing up in the Midwest in the 80s, 70s, and 80s, I did not get as much discrimination as I think I witnessed sometime in New York myself. And some of the discrimination among Chinese community themselves, the Chinese or the Asian community, and or what you said about the fundraising. I think there seems to be this competition, and I think what you touch upon is really about collaboration, and not just in New York, but the story of Chinese in America. Is really. I'm just finished reading Pam Zhang's book about and she is not from Chinatown. She's from Beijing. And her book, my book club, we just finished reading How Much of These Gold, How Much of These Hill is Gold. And this book was recommended on Obama's list for reading last year, and having read it, it's fabulous. And another book we also read was Interior Chinatown. So I think it's MoCA kind of the storytelling aspect of it is something that has done really well. I mean, museum is not just about the artifacts, like you said. There was, the stuff from the trash, but it's the oral history, and it's also the story. If we don't tell our story, who's going to tell it? So I think this is something that MoCA has done really well in terms of your the oral history project. I was involved with it last time. I think I saw you, but so these journeys, I think in some ways MoCA helps connect the dots. And so it sounds like you're also helping to connect with other Asian American and other Chinese American organizations that we benefit from working together, and also with other, maybe you talked about Black Lives Matters. When there's discrimination, it's discrimination against all of us, not just one race, but we do need to also stand up for justice. So tell us how then, how are you right now? Tell me about some of the positive development. I know the building is. When I was there, I know that was one thing. When we moved in 2009, the building was leased. There was a lease, and I also remember there was a loan with payments, and what you said about payrolls and stuff. I totally understand. But then there is a positive story also out of it too. I understand.
Yeah, no, it's the Phoenix Rising analogy. We feel like, I count my blessings. There have been so many silver linings this year for us, despite just a lot of difficulty, just personal, professional difficulty, a lot of difficulties this year, and direct loss. I think the one big thing that's different in the U.S. Than people who are in Hong Kong or mainland China is the death, and I think that part is probably not easily tangible. I feel like everyone I know has had someone pass in the last year, if not multiple people. And I think that part gets lost in the numbers and how we talk about COVID and the situation in the US versus in Hong Kong or China. We've had a lot of loss. So that all of that is going on at the same time of what we're trying to do. But I think, what I shared with you, and this is hot off the press, everybody, we have been renting the space, and and I'm going to stereotype right now, but Chinese people, we hate to rent. We don't like throwing money away. Okay. I don't know if it's my mother watching Gone with the Wind or just like not having a lot of possessions, but we like to own, and we like to be in real estate. So yes, we just signed the contract to buy the entire building. And the entire building means increasing our exhibit space by 10 times. It is increasing our space square footage by 6 times, and really serving as a local institution that serves the local community, but a national anchor for all the other 28 historical Chinese museums, and then serving as an international destination for everyone in Hong Kong to come and visit, because New York City still, when tourism comes back in it looks like 2024, 60 million people come to New York City every year. It's a $3 billion US tourism industry. So MoCA is perfectly situated. And a lot of people are like, okay, well, why didn't you do this in DC? You know what I say to them? Because the food is better in Chinatown. And you can come to this incredible experience and then have food. And the other thing about the new museum that, for those of you who have visited MoCA, we've taken your comments very seriously. MoCA right now ends in 1965. The exhibit, the permanent exhibit ends in 1965. So we recognize that the largest population of Chinese ancestry people in the US came after 1965. And there are so many people with these incredible journeys where they did their PhD, their postdoc at Columbia. They went to Palo Alto and started like 10 tech firms. They went to Houston and created a Taiwanese American community that's thriving. They went to Chicago and then they became, incredible people. They went to Hollywood and they became, so many things have happened in the last 40 years that we will be telling. And also the mastery of the transnationalism of the Chinese diaspora, the back and forth. I have a home in Marin County, then I have a home in Hong Kong, I have a place in Beijing, but then I love LA. So all these different components of that transnationalism, I feel like that's going to be so powerful in the new museum. And we will disclose that Maya Lin has worked already on the new concept for the new museum that we will own. And then also Ralph Applebaum Associates, you may know them as RAA, the leading museum designers in the world. They've designed so many incredible iconic museums, including the African American History and Culture Museum in DC, and currently working on the Obama Presidential Center and the Holocaust Museum. So why did RAA want to partner with MoCA? Because in their portfolio is missing a major part of the American narrative, and that's the Chinese American journey. So we had the same team as the one that did the African American History and Culture Museum, and the same team that's working on the Obama Center. So the new MoCA, we invite all of you to come, is going to be incredible. It will have a center for genealogy. So Alice Meng, we've talked about your last name. It's not an obvious spelling for your character. And when people in your family come to visit, they can put in Meng, and we can share all the different characters it may be. The last name Ing or Wu, the character for
right.
character that it goes back to. And then it's just going to have an incredible theater where we will cultivate Asian American artists. It's going to have the most amazing bookstore. We're going to be eating a lot of food in this museum, and it's just going to be incredible. So that is the silver lining, and we are working to that end, or to that beginning.
Well, that sounds great, because for those of people who do not know, the building, how many stories is that building? Is it 10?
It's 7. Yeah, it'll
7
be 6.
stories.
Actually, 6 with the basement, and
But
6 is the better number.
MoCA only had 2 floors, right? Or is it 3 floors?
One floor in the basement.
And then the basement, right. So, and it was already telling a lot of story with those 2 spaces, but now to be able to own the whole building, and it's also in the heart of China, well, Chinatown, Little Italy. So Soho area. So it's going to be really, so when is the Target reopening?
We are targeting, we're going to hit right when tourism comes. So I think we're counting down the days. It's about 1,288 days. But and the reason I know the number is because we want to stay on schedule.
Right.
And that's the other thing, being held accountable to being a good steward of people's gifts and donations to support this effort. And that's the thing with philanthropy too. This is also an opportunity for people to become philanthropists, right? There hasn't been another opportunity where we can put a bold stake in something, people, not just Chinese Americans or Chinese people, but anyone, to put a bold stake in the American narrative and to partner with us to do it.
Right.
And it's like Chinese, like, I don't know if you've always felt this, but it's a little like 不好意思 to ask for donation, right? So that's one of the problems why some of the organizations. I know.
This is one of my I think we have to have a 厚脸皮. I used to think that was a bad thing. You were being humble. No, 脸皮厚, if you're in America, if we don't ask, we will never tell. But I wanted to, some of the questions coming in, and I think you already answered that. But one of them was, and I struck when I started there in 2009, it was very much a Chinatown institution. So the question asked, Nancy has said your connection with mainland China and Chinatown is less than many of the areas like Flushing. Well, does MoCA hope to reignite the connection with mainland despite being, being by all for all? Or does MoCA aim mainly to focus on simply sharing, local Chinese history?
Oh, no, absolutely not. It will have a part that celebrates Chinatown, New York City, but also Chinatowns. A lot of people think Chinatowns were, tourist destinations. They're not. And this is, people don't know the history because it's not in the textbooks. This is not common knowledge. So we need a responsibility. And you talked about some of the divisiveness. There's a lot of divisiveness in the Chinese American community, beyond the fact that sometimes there's a phrase like 当自己的老板, right? Like Chinese people like to be their own boss, right? So a lot of entrepreneurial components, a lot of small, medium-sized companies. But beyond that, the divisiveness was formed because of the legislation. the legislation divided people. Okay, well, we're the educated elite from hypothetically Shanghai, and they were the railroad descendants or the restaurant owners. So this legislation created this sort of quota on the 105 people who could come in every year between 1943 and 65. And then it kind of left like, oh, well, they came in because they were laborers, right? And those are wounds that still exist. So the telling of the story of Chinatowns need to be seen as safe zones, as historic destinations. So Chinatowns and the history of Chinatowns are very, very important to how a 18-year-old international student from Beijing who's studying at Choate, how people perceive him in the broader American narrative. So those histories are important. And the more common that history becomes, the more important it is. But as I said, from 65 to today, that's the largest group of Chinese Americans who are coming in the population. We would not be doing the proper service if we did not cover, one, the transnationalism of those communities, two, the suburban Chinatowns that are formed in Monterey Park, in Diamond Bar, in Manhasset, in all these pockets of areas where there's so much Chinese culture and traditional, and people, we see the current Chinese diaspora as really global citizens. So that brings this whole other lens and very different successes, right? So we want to celebrate the successes, but let me be clear that I think we will truly benefit if we know the entire journey. So the 300,000 international students who were studying here before COVID from mainland China, if they know the journey of the earlier Chinese immigrants, they will have a greater sense of their experience in the United States. And that is what is so critically important to grasp. It's not like, let's just celebrate our successes. No, let's understand the history. And just like me, my father's Shanghainese, my mother was born in Sichuan during the war. I want to love and own my China history, and I do. I embrace it, right? And I know a lot of details around it. But even though I'm not from Southern China, my parents weren't railroad workers, I need to embrace that part of my journey because I'm an American of Chinese ancestry in this country. We can own both histories. And we can love and honor both histories. And I think if someone comes to the Museum of Chinese Ancestry and they can realize that after they walk out, I will feel like we've done something of our job.
Well, I know last time, I think I went to a MOCA program. You had Jeremy Lin in conversation with Ronnie Chang, and it was so much fun. And I came with my sister, who although we're 7 years apart, we have very different journeys. But what's great about MOCA, it is encompasses all of that, and that's why that journey tile that we had the three kids gave in honor of our parents' journey is something that holds dear to my heart. And it's one of the viewers said, even the fire has become part of the journey of MOCA in some ways. And like Phoenix Rising, it is really with Chinese New Year coming up. Hopefully, this year of the golden ox will be better than the year of the rat. And but I think part of what I'm curious too is also another interesting development I understand here in New York. In New York, we know that. This last year, we saw a Chinese American run for president. He did not get elected, but he went very far. And I understand he's now interested in running to become mayor of New York as a New Yorker. And also I also read you were talking about Ancestry. Ancestry just named, I think, a Chinese American as the new CEO. And I think the journey, I think the stories are going to be continuing. And I think hearing about the post-65 stories, which some of us are going to benefit from LBJ's signing of the immigration bill, is something that is also worth commemorating for, I'm so looking forward to it. But tell me, what are some of the stuff, that you are concerned about? What are you looking forward to? I think right now the new museum will be reopening. And are you, I think now hopefully we have somebody in the White House who's just going to be less antagonistic about immigration, or it's not going to call it the Chinese virus. But what are you looking forward to, and what are some of your concerns in the kind of the near term and the long term?
I'm really a student of U.S.-China bilateral relations, and I've really focused on that for much of my career. And it's so related to the post-65 work that MoCA does, because it really is so U.S.-China based. I am worried because even though President Biden and Vice President Harris are so, they're very forward thinking about immigration in a way that the past administration just completely, let's just not go there. But they are, immediately took actions, and immediately also last Tuesday had issues around Asian Americanism that they were addressing. So very impressive. Here's my greatest concern. Chinese people in America are still considered perpetually foreign. And David Henry Huang, many people talk about this. So I'll say it again, Chinese people in the United States have always been considered still foreign, right? We're fighting for legitimacy all the time. We're fighting for our Americanness all the time. You can be a fifth generation Mississippi Delta Chinese American, never married outside of China, you still look Chinese, but you're still get the question like, oh, when did you come here? When did you get here? And that perpetual foreignness is an issue if US-China bilateral relations continue to be fraught. So when there's tensions in the relationship, which have been constant for the last 8 years, my red flag in my mind is security around the museum. So that's a fear of mine. And maybe it's too aggressive a fear, but like it's a fear because where would you want to be? Where would you want to target? Where would you want to do something to upset that core? If your jobs are lost because someone's insinuating that they went to China, then who do you want to be mad at? Everybody needs an enemy, I think. And when you have an enemy, like you don't need it. I'm saying like everybody in their minds wants an enemy because it's like derail some other component of their existence. But I think that's the dangerous part of this whole thing, is that fraught US-China relations still have an impact on Chinese American livelihood. But how do we solve that? We solve that by putting up the new MoCA as soon as possible. We solve that by, I just joined the McGraw-Hill Advisory Committee. They do a lot of educational textbook works. Thank you, McGraw-Hill, for knowing that this part of the narrative is missing. The sooner we get this text beyond 2 sentences in the history textbooks and understanding the 200 years of the Chinese American contribution, railroads, Exclusion Act, all of the last 40 years of entrepreneurial technology in the medical fields and biomed and fintech, all these areas where Chinese have just been the leader. Zoom, thank you, Eric Yuan. WeChat, thank you, WeChat. How did we stay connected all this time with everybody? TikTok, thank you, Zhang Yiming. Thank you to Alibaba that was able. We have Alipay all over here. Thank you to the Chinese companies that are both based here as American companies or the ones that have been global. These companies have helped create a greater identity, and we need to get this museum up as soon as possible so the history can be redefined, so that no one will look at me and assume that I just got here from somewhere. But, let us be who we are. Let us be ourselves.
I think you're so right. I remember when I was there, Maya and I often compare stories because we both grew up in. She was born in Ohio, and I grew up in it. We grew up in Ohio, and always having to explain to people we're from Ohio, and everyone asking where are you really from, and but I have right now living in Hong Kong. Born in Taiwan and grew up in the Midwest. How do you tell people these stories? But you're right. My concern has been, to see what happened on the Capitol Hill a few weeks ago. If that can happen there, I think I do worried about, like you said, the safety and security. But I think we do need to tell our story. And I think MoCA has been such a great pioneer in telling our story. And what I would love to see is, I hope you'll keep those tiles of people because it was wonderful. And one of the tile that I remember the most was that of Qian Xuesheng. In fact, I think, was it Iris Chang wrote a biography of Qian Xuesheng, and I saw an exhibition of Qian Xuesheng in Beijing a couple of years ago, and his story of contributing in the science and technology, but under house arrest by FBI, and then in the end he and his family moved back to China in the 50s, and he helped created the rocketry program of China. So, but the way I think this, and that's something that concerns me too. I hope the Biden administration will look into, the students. I mean, the contribution, whether they're Chinese immigrant or Chinese students or Indian students. I think those contributions needs to be recognized. Not all of them are spies, so I think those are the stories that I look forward to seeing from the new MOCA. And continue to tell, and hopefully online, and there are ways, like you said, who would have heard of Zoom? I didn't hear a year ago. I did not know who Zoom was, and now we're all living in the world of Zoom. And so I think you have some wonderful points there. But I really, really want to take this opportunity to thank you for having the conversation, and I look forward to collaboration and hearing more about MOCA in the as you kind of get ready to launch a new initiative, and I have to also admit, I still get MOCA newsletters, and whatever programs you do, I have to say I shamelessly copy them for here at Asia Society Hong Kong.
That is the flattery I needed.
You know what? We need to be together. We learn from each other. We continue to learn from each other, and one of the things that I was so touched, the MOCA is really the family programming. We're part of the community, and really educating the young about their own history, and that's something that we're bringing to here at Asia Society. In fact, we have the whole lineup of online Chinese New Year programs coming up, and since we can't be together to celebrate Chinese New Year, we're going to bring dumpling making, whatever, all the wonderful cuisines that you can check out on our website. And also, we are also some program coming up. I know you had a program this week with Ken and Joanna. Ken and Joanna created the almanac for us, as you know, and we're going to have them talk to us next week about the Happy New Year.
Everyone should wear red underwear that day.
Well, if February 8th at 9 p.m., we're here in Hong Kong, we're going to hear from Ken and Joanna, and wear whatever red underwear or tops, whatever, and we're looking forward to that program. And also, and another thing you had mentioned, Ralph Applebaum, about the Obama Center. We here at Asia Society Hong Kong will be celebrating our 9th anniversary in this building. That's one thing that real estate. We do have our permanent home here in Hong Kong on 9 Justice Drive. And it was 9 years ago on February 9th, we opened our door to the public. And we're going to welcome back our architect, Billy Tsin and Todd William, along with some of the founder of Asia Society Hong Kong. And Billy and Todd, I know, is busy working with Ralph and the Obamas on the Obama Center, which hopefully will be opening sometime soon. And so that program will be on February 9th at 10 a.m. It's a members-only program. For those of you who are interested in becoming a member of Asia Society, you can join any of the centers. And as long as you're an Asia Society member, you can sign up for this members-only program. How it got started, the story behind the revitalization of this heritage site. And so with that note, I want to thank again, Nancy. I look forward to seeing you in person.
Yes.
Whether in Hong Kong or in New York, hopefully sometime this year. It's been last time I traveled a year ago, January 23rd, when I was in the West Coast, and I miss home, and I look forward to catching up with you, and let's continue talking and think about possibly of collaborating. And those of you who can join us tonight, support whether Asia Society, but definitely support MOCA. It's a gem telling the national story.
NYC.org.
Yeah, at MOCA-NYC.org. And
NYC.
it's not just telling the story of Chinese in America, but I think what Nancy said is so true. You know, it also is a diaspora story of Chinese diaspora, and is really worthy of your support. So thank you, Nancy. And
yeah, and Hong Kong always in my heart. Love Hong Kong. Thank you guys for coming out tonight to listen a little bit. And I'll be back soon too.
Great. Okay. Well, good night all. And thank you all for joining us, and have a wonderful evening, and have a wonderful day, Nancy, and a happy, healthy, safe Chinese New Year ahead. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Bye. Thanks everyone. Take care.
Bye-bye.